In the previous part, we learned how to create melodic movements of harmony using the native triads of the diatonic scale and key. We also learned that each triad can be associated with two related chords in the scale. The goal of this lesson is to become more conscious of how we target shapes and tones through melodic phrases and chord progressions. The good news is we can still reference those core triad shapes and positions we learned previously. I strongly recommend you get comfortable with the convenient 1-4-5 method covered in the previous part before you go ahead with this lesson. Here we have the C major scale mapped out across the top 4 strings, covering the diatonic C major key. This scale will also cover the relative minor key of A minor and the additional modes of the scale. Recapping on the 1-4-5 method from the last part, we could harmonise both the C major and relative A minor key, first using major triad shapes as follows. Now the relative minor triad shapes. All these triads can be used comfortably within both relative diatonic keys, C major and A minor in this case. Let's say we were in the key of C major, moving between C major and D minor, or the 1 and 2 chords of the scale. We might start by forming a simple melody around these chords, or there may already be a vocal melody, for example, that you want to instrumentalize. Here's an example. Initially, it's helpful to identify the melody notes that mark the resting start or change of a chord. So on C major, we might start with this C major triad position, which gives us the first melody note at the top of the shape. We might reference the root of C to help us with this positioning. As it happens, this C shape is in the open position, so it'll be especially familiar. When the chord changes to D minor, our melody note rests on the following position. So we might play a D minor triad in that position to harmonise the note, again with the note voiced at the top of the shape. Again, we could visualise a root position in relation to this shape for reference. We now have a reference shape for both chords that supports the resting part of the melody. We can now work on bridging them together, using the initial melody as our guide for forming the intervening harmony. By knowing where we need to be when the chord changes, i.e. our destination, we can help to keep the harmonic flow more connected to the backing music, while serving the melody. Let's continue, moving back from D minor to the tonic C major, starting with the preceding melody line. This time we're going to target a different D minor position to accommodate the following melody. This particular triad shape can be associated with a D minor 7th shape, with the bass on the 6th string. And finally resolving back to C major. Here we referenced another D minor 7 related shape, with the bass root on the 5th string. And then resolving to C major 7. We can associate this triad shape with a C major 7th shape with the bass root on the 6th string. So what we've done here is use the triad shapes from the C major scale to target our chord changes between the intervening melody. Each of these target shapes can be referenced against a fuller root shape for the chord we wish to target. For example, if we were targeting the tonic C major, we could use the following triad shapes, referencing a root position for the chord marked in red if it helps. With all these positions, we have the root, 3rd, 5th and 7th of the chord available as a melodic voice, the most common resting chord tones. For the 2 chord, D minor in this key, we could target the following triad shapes. The 3 chord, E minor in this key. The 4 chord, F major. The 5 chord, G major. If we wanted to voice the 5 chord as a dominant 7th, its natural 7th quality, we can introduce additional shapes, which gives us the flat 7th interval. The 6 chord and relative minor key tonic, A minor. Let's now try some targeting exercises over isolated chords so we can practice linking them together for each individual chord in the key, using other triads from the scale as the melodic bridge. A few examples, starting with C major and our target positions. D minor. You could also think of this as playing in the D Dorian mode. F major or F Lydian mode. G7 or G Mixolydian mode. What we're aiming at here is to be able to connect the melody to the shape positions we use, no matter where the melody note happens to fall. Shortly, we'll modify these shapes to accommodate other potential melody notes. Back to chord changes and an example in the relative key of A minor. Remember, all our major key triad positions will also work in their relative minor key. Again, through each chord change there, we targeted the chord in question with a related shape. With these harmonic markers in place, it's much easier to connect our chord melody to the backing music. Another example. Here we're descending from the four-chord of F major to the tonic C major via E minor and D minor, the 3 and 2 chords respectively. First, some target shapes. Now let's flesh out the melody line using other triads from the scale. By being able to move fluidly between the upper and lower 3-part shapes, we can more economically harmonise melodies that move across a wider interval and pitch span. So far, we've given ourselves the most important harmonic destinations up the neck to connect a resting melody note to its related chord. We've essentially made the root 3rd, 5th and 7th of each chord in the key available for our resting melody note. For example, here we can see the target tones of F major formed on the top string of our F major shapes, and F major 7 shapes. Similar thing with our D minor shapes, D minor and D minor 7. But we can complete this picture by making colour tones such as the 9th, 11th and 13th available for our melody, still referencing the same shape positions. To do this, let's scale out the top string of our 3-part shapes, starting with the lower shapes. We're now going to go through each reference shape like before, but this time we'll move the top string, effectively our melody string, through the different available chord tones, starting with C major. What we've effectively done here is create new colour shapes around those initial reference shape positions, simply by repositioning the top tone. But what's also interesting is that when we find ourselves forming familiar triad shapes such as this ninth shape, we can play it in different positions like we would any other triad. In this case, G major over C gives us a C major 9 voicing. Moving to the 2-chord D minor, forming new shapes around its natural colour tones. We'll be specifically exploring these kinds of colour shapes in more depth in another part. So why did we do this? Because sometimes the melody will come to rest on a chord tone other than the root 3rd, 5th or 7th. So knowing how you can change that top tone of the target shape will give you access to these colour tones when needed. This is as much an ear training skill as it is a spatial awareness of colour tones across the neck. For example, here we come to rest on the 9th of C major. On the 9th of G major. On the 11th of D minor. We've now potentially given ourselves harmonic destinations for all the melodic notes that might occur over any chord in a diatonic key, major, minor, and the modes. Try applying the same process to different keys, using the triad shapes of the related scale as your initial reference positions. While this is still just one piece of the complete picture, it is the solid groundwork we need for accessibly combining melody and harmony and should give you a lot to play with. And be reassured that all we've looked at so far has a much broader application than just chord melody. So you'll be able to use this knowledge in many different intuitive ways for aiding your improvisation and songwriting, or even just expanding your chord vocabulary. The gradual piecing together of this rather complex topic will continue. For more help with this and other concepts, please consider joining my Patreon. There you can get access to a growing library of exclusive content, vote on new lessons you want to see, and get priority answers to your questions. Thank you so much for your time and support. Cheers.